Hey everyone, welcome back. You know how much we love a good deep dive, and today we're tackling a figure whose ideas still resonate over a century later, William James.
Yeah, what's so fascinating about William James is that his work just feels surprisingly relevant today.
It really does, and we had a listener send in some awesome material about him, so I'm ready to jump in and see what aha moments pop up. Are you game?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so first things first. For those who might not be familiar, who exactly was William James? Why should we still care about him over a century later? What makes him so important?
William James lived from 1842 to 1910, and he wasn't just some stuffy academic, he was a true pioneer in both philosophy and psychology, like a rare combination.
A true Renaissance man.
Exactly. And one of his biggest contributions was this idea he called pragmatism.
Okay, pragmatism. I feel like I've heard that term thrown around, but to be honest, I'm not always sure what it actually means.
Right, it can sound a little jargony, but it's actually a really powerful idea. Imagine a world where truth isn't some fixed absolute thing.
Okay, so not some set-in-stone fact.
Right, but rather something dynamic, something that's always evolving.
Interesting. So instead of searching for one unchanging truth, he was saying, dot what? That we should see truth as more fluid.
Exactly. James flipped the script on how we understand truth, basically. He said, an idea's truth, what makes it true is in its practical consequences. So, in other words, if it works, it's true.
Interesting.
It's about asking, does this belief help me live a better life, a more meaningful life? Not just, is this true in some abstract sense?
So it's not just about debating ideas in a vacuum. It's about how those ideas actually play out in the real world.
Exactly. And that was revolutionary at the time. You have to understand he challenged centuries of philosophical thought that sought these grand universal truths.
Right, those big sweeping statements about the nature of reality.
Yeah, but James brought philosophy down to earth. He connected it to our everyday experiences.
It sounds like a very modern way of thinking, focusing on what works, what gets results, kind of like a precursor to scientific experimentation in a way.
You're right on the money. And that emphasis on the practical wasn't just confined to his philosophy. It spilled over into his work on psychology, too, particularly with this groundbreaking idea of the stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness. Okay, I have to admit that sounds kind of intimidating, like something you'd read in a dense philosophy book.
Yeah, it does have a certain ring to it.
But I'm guessing James found a way to make it relevant to our everyday lives, right? Because let's face it, we're not all philosophers.
Absolutely. Think about the last time you were trying to focus on a task, maybe writing an email or reading a book,
Oh, tell me about it.
but your mind kept wandering.
Happens all the time.
Suddenly you're thinking about that upcoming trip, or you remember a nagging worry.
Or what you want for dinner, especially with that email example, is like my to-do list just starts writing itself in my head.
Exactly. That's your stream of consciousness in action right there. Before James, psychologists often thought about thoughts as these separate, static things, almost like individual snapshots.
Okay, I kind of see where they were coming from.
But James, he said, no way. He argued that our thoughts are much more like a river, constantly flowing, changing, never quite the same from one moment to the next.
Oh, I like that analogy. So instead of these isolated thought bubbles, it's more like this continuous stream of experiences, emotions, thoughts, all swirling together. And it feels very fluid, very alive when you put it that way.
Exactly. And that was a radical shift in perspective at the time. It challenged this passive view of the mind that was pretty dominant back then. You see, James believed that we're active participants in shaping our thoughts. We're not just passively receiving information from the outside world.
So we're not just sponges soaking up information.
Yep.
We're actively making sense of it all, connecting the dots, creating meaning in this, like you said, this constant flow of experience.
You got it. And this idea, this shift in perspective, it didn't just impact psychology, it had this ripple effect in literature and art, too.
Wow, talk about influence.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
But I actually want to switch gears for a second.
Okay, sure.
Because we're about to dive into the part of James's work that I find personally the most intriguing. His work on the psychology of religion.
Ah, yes.
And I have to admit, this is the area where I really geeked out in the material you sent over.
I can imagine.
So to start us off, what's so fascinating about James's approach to religion?
Well, what's really interesting is that James wasn't concerned with proving or disproving religious doctrines. He wasn't trying to tell anyone what to believe.
So instead of getting bogged down in those big theological debates, he went straight to the source, human experience.
Exactly. He was more interested in the psychological and practical effects of religious beliefs on individuals. How these beliefs shape their lives, their actions, their understanding of the world. What difference did it actually make in how they live their lives?
So for James, it wasn't about the objective truth or falsehood of a belief, but rather about its function within a person's life.
Right.
How did it help them navigate the world, find meaning, or even connect with something larger than themselves?
Yes. Think about his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. In it, he dives deep into these personal accounts of religious experiences, exploring their diverse nature, and really emphasizing the profound impact they had on individuals.
Yeah, and he treated these experiences with such respect and empathy,
Yeah.
recognizing their power and significance, regardless of your own personal beliefs.
Absolutely. And I think this approach feels incredibly relevant today, especially in our increasingly diverse world. It's about understanding the human element of belief, the deeply personal ways in which people find meaning and purpose, even if those ways are different from our own.
When we talk about this search for meaning and purpose, it's hard to avoid that age-old question. Do we really have free will? Or are our lives already, predetermined?
It's a big one.
It really is. And I know from the material you shared that James had some pretty strong opinions about this.
He did. And this is where his pragmatism really shines, I think. For James, it wasn't about getting stuck debating whether free will exists in some abstract sense. He wanted to focus on the practical implications.
Okay, I like where you're going with this. So instead of getting lost in the theoretical weeds, he wanted to know how believing in free will or not believing in it could actually impact our lives.
Exactly. And he firmly believed that embracing free will, believing in our own agency, was incredibly empowering. He felt that it was essential for personal growth, for living a meaningful life.
It makes sense, right? If we believe that we have the power to make choices, to shape our own destinies, we're more likely to take action, to strive for something better.
Precisely. And this ties back to his idea of pragmatism so beautifully. It's about the practical effects of our beliefs. If we believe that we're capable of change, we're more likely to act in ways that make that change a reality.
So to put it simply, our beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies.
In a way, yes. It's not about denying the challenges that we face or pretending that everything is, sunshine and rainbows.
Sure.
It's about recognizing that we have a role to play and shaping our own responses to those challenges.
It's a very hopeful and optimistic view of human potential.
Hmm.
But of course, James wasn't the only intellectual heavyweight on the scene back then. Were there other philosophers who, maybe challenged his ideas or had different perspectives?
Oh, absolutely. Philosophy thrives on debate and disagreement. Think about someone like Immanuel Kant, for example. He believed in these universal moral laws, these absolute truths that exist independent of our experiences.
Right.
And that's a pretty stark contrast to James's more fluid, context-dependent view of truth.
It sounds like they were coming at the idea of truth from completely different angles.
Definitely.
And what about William Clifford? I feel like I've heard that name before, but I can't quite place it.
Clifford's a fascinating figure. He was a mathematician and philosopher who argued that it's always wrong to believe anything without sufficient evidence. He was all about logic and proof.
Okay, so a bit more of a hardline stance.
Yeah, you could say that. Whereas James, he recognized that sometimes we need to make a leap of faith, even without ironclad evidence, especially when it comes to things like meaning and purpose.
So even back then, these big questions about the nature of truth, the role of evidence, and how much we can really know, they were front and center. It's amazing how those same questions still resonate with us today.
It really speaks to their enduring power. And James' influence, it didn't end with those debates. His ideas about pragmatism, the stream of consciousness, the psychology of religion, they went on to inspire countless thinkers across various fields.
It's incredible, isn't it, how one person's ideas can have such a ripple effect throughout history.
It really is.
Well, there you have it. We've journeyed through the life and work of William James, a true trailblazer who wasn't afraid to challenge conventional thinking and left behind this incredible legacy that continues to shape how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
If we could imagine a modern-day William James, I think they'd be deeply engaged in discussions about mental health, advocating for a more compassionate and holistic approach to well-being.
Absolutely.
They might also be found at the intersection of science and religion, encouraging open dialogue and understanding between those two seemingly different worlds.
It's clear that James was way ahead of his time. He reminds us to embrace our agency, to focus on the practical effects of our beliefs, and to approach life's big questions with a sense of curiosity and an open mind.
He also reminds us that even these seemingly complex ideas can have a profound impact on our everyday lives. It's not just about philosophical abstractions, it's about finding ways to live more meaningful, fulfilling lives.
What a fantastic deep dive. A huge thank you to you, our amazing listeners, for sending us down this rabbit hole of knowledge. It's been so much fun exploring these ideas with you.
Absolutely. And as you go about your day, we'll leave you with this question. What resonated most with you about William James? How might his ideas about pragmatism, the stream of consciousness, or the importance of personal experience influence your own thinking?
Keep those wheels turning, and until next time, happy exploring, everyone.